And if you're not, I hope that there's some light in the day for you today. So thank you so much for joining us. We're always humbled and deeply appreciative that you join our little community here at New Church Live throughout the days and weeks as people just get a chance to reflect together off of what some of these bigger questions might be around life and get ourselves centered and grounded. And part of the centering and grounding parts is this idea that as we move forward, it's the same God, but we have different ideas. That our view of God when we're younger is very different than our view of God when we're older, and that's part and parcel. And we need to actually grow into more and more a mature view of God and spirituality, and that these things shift. And it's not that an older view is wrong and the new view is right. It's just this is how life goes. It's a process. It's a movement as our particular perspectives around God grow and become more alive, actually. So I want to read for you a passage here that talks about one of the biggest shifts we can make. And I think it's big because we got to make sure we're actually not stuck in the first one. So this is from the book Secrets of Heaven 31:31. Here's one example of something that is true. God is never angry and never punishes everyone. Just think about that. God never angry, never punishes anyone, much less does evil to anyone, and nothing ever comes from the Lord but what is good. Yet in its infancy, this form of truth is that the Lord is angry when we sin and therefore punishes us. In some people, it even becomes the idea that evil comes from him. As we advance from childhood, though, and grow mature in judgment, we rid ourselves of that which served as truth for us because it appeared to be true. Little by little, we clothe ourselves in the real truth that the Lord is never angry, never punishes, much less does evil. So the former truth introduces us into the latter. That's a beautiful, beautiful way to kind of hold it. Again, deep theological language. It's not that easy to maybe follow, but the principle behind it is super simple. When we're young, we have this idea, sort of crime and punishment, very transactional view of God's love, and that God can withdraw love from us, and if we're wrong, and sort of God as who's naughty and who's nice, figuring that out, and the idea that we do the right thing to please God, and we avoid the wrong thing because we don't want to displease God, we don't want to make God angry. And that view, again, very transactional. It's based on very much a yes-no kind of format to life. And it's important. It's sort of the way I look at it is it's kind of like learning the scales, and we just learn basic obedience. Basic, here's what we need to do. We're going to do it. There's consequences if you don't. And that's a way to hold God. And importantly, it's part of our life story, and it's actually an immature way to hold God. We need to allow that view to mature. And the way that view matures, which is so incredibly powerful, like God is always loving. God never tests. God is never the source of evil. So if you have out there some idea of God's punishing you or about to punish you, or heaven forbid, you do this because then God will punish you, that's not it at all. And it takes time to go there. And it's a very slow, methodical process over years where we come to see that, the God is just ever loving. Yesterday on Sermon Writing Team, it's this bit where we really come to see there's never a worthiness question with God. God is never going to sort those who are worthy from those who are not. It's just not in the essence of God's love to do that. And there's a couple of lessons here. One of the real important ones is that we have to be really careful. If we are getting older and we're sort of sliding back into that view of God sort of as the punisher, God is the one who kind of sorts who's worthy, who's unworthy, we're missing what the love that God really wants us to have for this world, and the love that we get to experience and sort of pass on to others. That's really important, because think of the implications of that. When we go back into this idea of a punishing God who sends tests, inevitably we're going to put ourselves in that role, which is like, whoa, that we're the ones who are to test because we're the ones who obviously get it. It's always interesting, this is something to just be careful. I'm saying it very tongue in cheek. Some of the most overtly religious people I know, they can be sometimes pretty hard to be around because they believe they're right and everyone else is wrong. And so they can sort of assume that punisher role. They can assume that I get to choose who's worthy and who's not. Be super, 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 super careful about doing that. And the second part of it is just think of the world that opens up. I mean, imagine the world we have, right? So we get rid of this thought that God punishes and God tests. And what is our life like without that thought? Well, our life without this thought is this idea that there is a loving God who's always there to help us. Fall down 7 times, get up 8, as the saying goes. God's always there to help us recover. And that doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. It doesn't mean that we don't need to be accountable for those mistakes. It doesn't mean that we don't need to be forthright and honest about those mistakes. All those things absolutely true. And at the same time, we have to allow it to be held within a context of love. And why is that important? Because if that's how we think God holds us, that's how we'll believe we are to hold other people. Our view of God is central to our life. And if we really get, like, God is loving, no matter whatness of God, God is not interested in worthiness tests, not interested in just testing, period. That he's always there and trying to help us to take the next step. What next? Instead of becoming yes, no, it becomes this big shift, I think, morally, where we go into yes and. Yes, this was hard. Yes, I made this mistake. And this is what I can do to move forward. It's a beautiful place to be. And we get to do that ourselves, and we get to allow other people to experience that as well, our loved ones. That's the place you want to be in life. And it's a much better place, much more peaceful life that we'll live, much more inspiring place, and we'll be religious in the best sense of the word. I remember years ago there was a famous study, probably 15 years ago, and it was they asked people who were not going to church what were their judgment of people who did, and the number one thing was judgmental. And I thought, like, we shouldn't be known for that. We should be known as being loving. That's what people should really know. They should really say, who's a Christian and how do you know? They should say, it's the loving people in my life. They seem to have some way of doing it that's really loving, and they obviously have a model of God that sort of helps them to hold that framework. So I hope that makes sense, friends. So quick recap, same God, different perspectives. One of the big ones is moving from sort of God the punisher to God as this loving being. Make sure you're allowing that evolution, because as you allow that evolution to happen, God becomes more free. We become more free. We get to do the best we can then to try to pass on this great loving gift that God gives us versus the punishment, hellfire, and wrath that some people seem to prefer, which is not a good way to go. All right, friends, hope that makes a lot of sense. And what we're going to do now is we're going to come in for our gentle landing here at New Church Live, get my trusty rusty bell here. What we're going to do is we listen to a prayer bell, we do a meditation from the Old Testament, we do the Our Father prayer, and we do a little blessing there at the end, and then we'll say hi to friends who've joined us on Facebook. So with that, dear friends, let's get a little breath. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I. Be still and know that. Be still and know. Be still and. Be still. Be. Our Father, who art in the heavens, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so upon the earth. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you, bring you home, and bring you peace. Amen. All right, dear friends, let's get a little quick hello to dear friends here. And again, I hope everybody has a wonderful day and weekend ahead for themselves. We certainly do get a little family wedding action going on here, which is very exciting for us. So congratulations to James and Marissa coming up tomorrow. All right, there we go. All right, Marcus, good morning to you, buddy. Hope you're doing well. All right, dear friends. Well, listen, God bless. Have a wonderful day.